Hello and welcome to the Gaggle Walk Challenge, and if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Szamuely. Here with me today, of course, is co-founder of the Gaggle, Peter Lavelle. So, Peter, it seems as if the um, the U.S. media and the European media as well have picked up on something that's really happening on the negotiations on the war in Ukraine, namely that the Europeans and the Americans are not on the same page. This has caused a considerable anger, on the part of the media, because they've been saying something very different, and now they're having to admit that that somehow there isn't a Western united front supporting Ukraine. And so here's the story that appeared in the Wall Street Journal. And here it says that um, uh, Trump tells European leaders in private that Putin isn't ready to end war. U.S. president made the acknowledgement after speaking to the Russian leader this week, but backed off on additional sanctions. So we've already talked this week about this telephone conversation that took place between Trump and Putin, Trump and Zelensky, and then Trump and Zelensky and the Europeans. And the Europeans who have been insisting that, oh, there's a united front, we're all on the same page, we all want to sanction Russia, are more or less now admitting that, well, we're not all on the same page. And hence, they're putting out all sorts of stories, clearly that, essentially attacking Trump and, suggesting that Trump is somehow being dishonest with them, or he has been dishonest, or he's been inconsistent. And so that's why they're leaking these stories. Here's the Wall Street Journal, and we see how they leaked to the New York Times, expressing their displeasure because the European leaders, had been lying in insisting that they were all on the same page. They haven't been on the same page for quite some time, but they've been insisting, oh, yeah, we're all on the same page. But that, in fact, has not been the case. So here they say Trump tells European leaders in private that Putin isn't ready to end war.
Well, but I mean, is this editorial license, this title? Trump tells European leaders in private that Putin isn't ready for a ceasefire. Now that's something different.
Right, but that's yes. Well, that's a very good point. But that's you are absolutely right, because that has been the position of the Europeans and the media, who just simply repeat their stories, that the two things are one and the same: the ceasefire and an end to the war. That somehow, well, this 30-day ceasefire is really a way to end the war, even though they know perfectly well it isn't an end to the war. But they want to suggest that, oh, well, that, if you're interested in peace, then you have to be interested in the 30-day ceasefire. And so, as I say, on a call Monday, President Trump told European leaders that Russian President Vladimir Putin isn't ready to end the Ukraine war because he thinks he's winning, according to three people familiar with the conversation. The acknowledgement was what European leaders had long believed about Putin, but it was the first time that we're hearing it from Trump. It also ran counter to what Trump has often said publicly, that he believes Putin genuinely wants peace.
Well, this is a fake story, okay? I mean, I'm sorry. The whole premise of it is fake because if you're assuming ceasefire ends the war, then you're gonna be off to the races. This is
Right.
an article for it. But if you actually parse the words, there's something different. Then this is a fool's errand.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, that what they're doing here is to say, well, if Putin isn't ready to accept the 30-day ceasefire, that means Putin isn't ready to end the war. So that's it's like when we were talking earlier about about anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. So in the same way, they want to confound these two different notions. Oh, the 30-day ceasefire and a desire to end the war. And then here, although Trump appears to have come around to the idea that Putin isn't ready for peace, which so this is again, this is just made up, that hasn't led him to do what the Europeans and Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky have been arguing he should do, double down on the fight against Russia. So, again, what they're trying to do here is
I mean, okay, double down on the fight against. So, I mean, who are the players here doubling down to fight Russia? I mean, can we name them, please?
right.
I
That's
mean,
right. Yeah. Um, so that's the whole idea here is that they're putting forward this notion. Oh, we have this 30-day ceasefire. We know Russia isn't going to accept a 30-day ceasefire. Therefore, since Russia isn't going to accept a 30-day ceasefire, and Trump says they're not going to accept it, oh, well, then you need to double down on the fight against Russia. That's what that's what you're going to do. This little game that the Europeans are playing with the media happily continuing it is essentially just a way of continuing the war. That's what it is. It's all in the name of peace or whatever, but it's basically about how do we continue this war. And so by putting forward this nonsensical idea of the 30-day ceasefire. Trump had held an earlier call with European leaders on Sunday, a day before his 2-hour conversation with Putin. He had indicated then that he could impose sanctions if Putin refused a ceasefire, according to people familiar with the conversation. See, whenever they say these things, where's the evidence for this? Trump never said that. They're always making this stuff up. Oh, he had indicated that he could impose sanctions if Putin refused a ceasefire. Where's the evidence for that? And then by Monday, he had shifted again. Then again, this is just you're just making stuff up. He wasn't ready to do that. Instead, Trump said he wanted to proceed quickly with lower level talks between Russia and Ukraine at the Vatican.
well, he said, well, he didn't change that. After the call, he made it very clear. I'm paraphrasing here. I got the two sides together.
That's it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And again, paraphrasing, they're more aware of the intricacies and the
That's right.
details of this
That's
conflict.
exactly what he said. Yeah, that's exactly what he said. And it says the call Monday included Zelensky, Macron, Merz, Maloney, Ursula von der Leyen. And then it was in part the culmination of a European diplomatic offensive that has started some 10 days earlier. This is, of course, another lie. There is no European diplomatic offensive. What they're trying to do is stave off. The diplomatic offensive came from the United States. It was the Trump administration that launched the diplomatic offensive. The Europeans have been scrambling to try to thwart it, and they've tried one thing after another they're doing to thwart it. So there is no European diplomatic offensive.
You know what this is all about, everybody? All of these fake, distorted articles that just flood the media. The clock is ticking.
Right.
This is part of offensive on the part of the media and members of the quote unquote deep state, for lack of a better term, to start drumming up support for another appropriation for Ukraine.
Yep.
That's what this is about. Okay.
Right.
They wanted what they want to do is they want to control the narrative, control the this is all nonsense. I mean, it's just the level of dishonesty here is just astounding for us. Okay. You know why? Because we know the timeline.
Right.
This is what we do every day. Okay. And then this publication is telling me what the timeline is. No,
Right.
no, this is just disinformation.
And said, while the effort ultimately didn't succeed in getting Trump to do that through additional sanctions, Europeans saw some upside to the outcome. The process had helped clarify for everyone, including Trump, where Putin stood.
Here we go.
He is unwilling to halt the war at this stage. And for the Europeans, it helped underscore that it was now largely up to them to support Ukraine. Europeans don't believe the Trump administration will stop US weapons exports as long as Europe or Ukraine pays for them. Now, the problem there is that that's just a fantasy. The notion that somehow oh, they can just do this, support Ukraine, and then so we really don't need the Americans. They know perfect well that that's absolute nonsense, and that basically, if you don't have the Americans on board, this isn't going to happen. Only the Americans have the capability to keep this war going. So the whole idea, well, we can continue doing this. So, in fact, this is again absolute thoroughly dishonest. Oh well, that's okay. We can keep this war going. And then this isn't my war, Trump told reporters on Monday after his Putin call. We got ourselves entangled in something we shouldn't have been involved in.
Well, that's very Trumpian. Okay.
Right. Well, yeah, but I would say this has been fairly consistent. He said this really from the start of the so-called SMO, that we shouldn't be involved in this. So Trump had indicated in a call with Macron, Maloney, and so on, that he would dispatch Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Special Envoy Keith Kellogg to talks that are now expected to take place at the Vatican. So they said this was Sunday, so this is the day before the Monday call. On Monday, Trump appeared to be non-committal about a U.S. role, according to one of the people briefed on the call. And then some of the Europeans on the call Monday insisted that the outcome of any talks at the Vatican must be an unconditional ceasefire. So again, they're saying this. I mean, the reason why Trump is non-committal, because he says this is pointless. I mean, there's no point in insisting on this, and making it a condition. Oh well, look, hey, Putin isn't accepting an unconditional ceasefire. Therefore, you need to double down. You need more sanctions. You need to send more weapons.
You know what this reminds me of? Some politicians and a lot of television presenters, news presenters, or as the British say, news readers. What they do is it's really kind of funny. They write talking points on their fingers.
Mm, right,
Okay. They write it, you can rub it off later. But
right,
you can have talking points, and when you're
right,
using your body language, you can look, what's my next
right,
talking point here? I think all the European leaders that it's right on their index finger,
right.
ceasefire now,
That's right.
okay? And
That's right.
they just constantly go back to that,
Right,
okay?
right.
And it's boring, it's nauseating, but just by dint of saying it over and over again, they think it's going to happen. It's not.
No, no. So they insisted the Yakko talk must be unconditional ceasefire, but Trump again demurred. He said he didn't like the term unconditional. He said he had never used that term.
That's actually true. I've never heard him say
Right.
that.
And then he say this, and this is very important, because and then the Wall Street Journal says, although he used it when calling for a 30-day ceasefire in a post on his Truth Social platform on May the 8th. No, he did not. That was the one when he said, ideally. They said that ideally, and this is the lie that they all perpetrate. They all go on repeating it. Oh, he called for an unconditional ceasefire. He didn't. He said, ideally, that's what we'll have. The Europeans eventually agreed to drop their insistence on the adjective. After Putin's no-show in Istanbul, the Europeans again pressed Trump to consider putting more pressure on the Russian leaders. This is what this is the diplomatic initiative. How do we get Trump involved in our policy? More pressure on the Russian leader. They approved modest new sanctions against Russia, but continue work on a stronger package of measures. Trump announced he had set up a call with Putin, saying peace prospects could only be advanced if the U.S. and Russian leaders spoke. So that was last Friday. And then when Trump spoke on Sunday with European leaders, ahead of that Putin call, he signaled the U.S. might join Europe in sanctioning Russian energy exports and bank transactions. And then we have Lindsey Graham said Wednesday he had gathered 81 co-sponsors for the bill. And then the Sunday call included some of Trump's signature off-the-cuff style, mixing praise and criticism of European leaders. He complimented Merz on his beautiful English. I love it even more with your German accent, he said, according to a person on the call. Now, this is just so funny because I think this is just Trump's method of essentially just staving off the Europeans by saying these sort of things. It kind of reminds me of like Andy Warhol used to be like that. He didn't really want to answer questions, and so he would say, things that didn't really make very much sense, but it would be a way of warding people off. So it's like, like in that movie about I Shot Andy Warhol, that crazy woman presented him with this manifesto, Society for Cutting Up Men. I said, wow, look at how beautifully typewritten it is. Maybe we should hire her to be our typewriter. I mean, so it's just a way of, I love it more even with your German accent. At another point, he digressed into a broadside against Europe's migration policies. Trump said out of control migration was bringing their countries to the brink of collapse. But the point is, just when reading this, Trump knows what they're trying to do. So it's basically just going through the motions of having this conversation. They all want to talk to him. And basically, he's just talking about all sorts of other things. I love the German accent. You need to do something about migration. But he doesn't want to get roped in to their schemes of sanctions and more arms. And then Macron, who has the longest relationship with Trump, asked him to stop. You cannot insult our nations, Donald, said Macron, according to a person on the call.
Well, you can say that, but he will do it. Okay.
Why can't I insult your nation? The tone, however, was positive overall, said the people familiar with the call. It left some with the impression that Trump just might support fresh sanctions if Putin didn't agree
This is like a fever dream.
It is a fever dream. Might support if Putin didn't agree to a ceasefire. But those hopes were dashed a day later. But you're right, it's a fever dream. He had never said this. And then there's the Times, just wringing its hands. Trump's new position on the war in Ukraine, not my problem. In a reversal. So they all say this in a reversal. If he's a reversal, he hasn't reversed. There's been no reversal. President Trump appeared to have backed off, joining a European push for new sanctions on Russia, seemingly eager to move on to doing business deals with it. For months, President Trump has been threatening to simply walk away from the frustrating negotiations for a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine. After a phone call on Monday between Mr. Trump and President Putin, that appears to be exactly what the American president is doing. The deeper question now is whether he is also abandoning America's 3-year-long project to support Ukraine, a nascent democracy that he has frequently blamed for being illegally invaded. How is it a nascent democracy? You overthrow the legally elected president, the president who had won the election. How is it a nascent democracy?
Well, I agree, but I'm actually quite puzzled by this statement. The deeper question now is whether he's also abandoning America's 3-year-long project. Well, we've been calling it the Ukraine project for a very long time.
Okay.
I don't know who wrote this. It's probably somebody, a frustrated creative writer with a useless degree from an Ivy League college.
I think it was David Sanger, their usual guy.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, George and I have chronicled, if you want to go back and look, the Ukraine project goes all the way back to the end of the Cold War. One could even make arguments back to the 1950s while it was still part of the Soviet Union. So, yes, the 3-year hot war project, yes,
Right.
that's true. But, it's usually not phrased that way. So,
Right.
my backhanded compliment.
That's right. That's right. Mr. Trump told President Zelensky and other European leaders after his call with Mr. Putin that Russia and Ukraine would have to find a solution to the war themselves, just days after saying that only he and Mr. Putin had the power to broker a deal. And he backed away from his own threats to join a European pressure campaign that would include new sanctions on Russia. Again, they made this up, his own threats. He had never said that. According to six officials who were familiar with the discussion. They spoke on condition of anonymity to describe a private conversation. So when the president has these conversations, I mean, he has all sorts of flunkies who are all listening in on this conversation. Remember that was when that's
Vindman.
yeah, Vindman, exactly. With that impeachments, they're all listening in and they're all taking notes. And I'm sure there are still the Vindman types on the National Security Council, and they rushed off to talk to the New York Times and the Washington Post. Mr. Trump, of course, is usually a fan of financial pressure. He routinely threatens tariffs and sanctions against allies and adversaries alike. But in a statement to the New York Times, a White House official said this was different. The official who asked for anonymity to discuss the president's private call said additional sanctions against Russia would hinder business opportunities, and the president wants to maximize economic opportunities for Americans. Now, this is not at all true, because essentially what Trump is saying is that additional sanctions are not going to be helpful. He didn't say, "Oh, because we got business opportunities down the road." It's not helpful. It's not getting us anywhere if we impose additional sanctions.
Well, and also he doesn't want to give the Europeans a win. He doesn't want to appear that he's caving to their desires,
Right.
and he doesn't want to be seen as being prone to pressure.
Right.
I think he's quite adamant about that.
Yes, I think so. He also, and one has to say, he doesn't like the Europeans.
No.
I mean, the story broke today. He sent out a truth saying he's going to impose 50% tariffs across the board on products from Europe starting June the 1st. But I don't know if he's going to go through with it. He's threatened things like that before, but he's clearly that he's just not in the mood to placate the Europeans. I mean, that's 50%
Well,
tariff.
I mean, you can say what you want about Donald Trump, but I mean, if you want to, if you have, you're in a conflict with someone, hitting their wallet is always the most
Right.
effective.
That's right. That's right. But this is, I mean, we've talked a lot about the Trump doctrine. I mean, the point about the Trump doctrine is that he doesn't really think that what we call friends and allies are really any kind of friend or ally of the United States. If they're screwing us over with their unfrayed, with their trade agreements and these trade deficits, those that are hurting us, and they're preventing us from selling our products on the continent because of all these regulations. And we're subsidizing their military, and we're subsidizing their welfare, and we're subsidizing their medication. Then it says, how, in what sense are they our friends and allies? What exactly do they do for us? And that is a way, for a Trump doctrine. It says, well, I have to think about what's really good for Americans, not what's good for everyone else. Um, And so here, and he particularly feels this when it comes to Ukraine, because we're getting sucked into this and we're not able to, I'm trying to extricate ourselves out of it. And when I can't do it with these off because of our friends and allies. American officials, including Secretary of State Marco Rubio, have countered critics by pointing out that existing sanctions on Russia, largely imposed after the 2022 invasion, remain in place, as does intelligence sharing with Ukraine, which is correct. That in fact, that hasn't changed after all the whole hand wringing. That the sanctions are still in place. When Vladimir Putin woke up this morning, he had the same set of sanctions on him that he's always had since the beginning of this conflict. This is what Rubio told the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Yet the subtext of Mr. Trump's call with Mr. Zelensky and the Europeans is that the era of American expenditures of diplomatic energy, new arms for Ukraine, and economic sanctions against Russia is rapidly coming to an end. Several European officials said the message they took from the call was that they should not expect the United States to join them anytime soon in piling additional financial pressures onto Mr. Putin. And indeed, they imposed the 17th round of sanctions. And as we discussed the other day, even the media said, without waiting for the United States, they just did it. They said, we're not waiting for Trump to join us.
Yeah, well, just kind of a personal aside, everyone. I came across a an app called US Mall. You can find it on the App Store, And all of the retailers, the clothing retailers that left Russia, well, some entrepreneurs have started their own business. So I'm buying a pair of Dockers tomorrow, which you can't find in Russia, but will be delivered to me in 7 working days by the postal system. So you know obviously some sanction, like for food exporters and stuff like that to Africa, yeah, that's a real pain in the neck, okay? But I mean, in general, most people have gotten, if you needed something, you've gotten around it. You've
Right,
gotten around it, okay?
right. Um, and then for Mr. Trump, this is a reversal. In social media posts in recent months, he episodically threatened tariffs and sanctions against Russia if it refused to join Ukraine in declaring a 30-day unconditional ceasefire. Untrue. And then here he goes, if the ceasefire is not respected, the US and its partners will impose further sanctions, he wrote on Truth Social on May the 8th after a call with Mr. Zelensky. Let's see exactly what he said. There's the thing. They're always lying about what he said here. Talks with Russia, Ukraine continue. The US calls for ideally a 30-day unconditional ceasefire. Hopefully, an acceptable ceasefire will be observed. An acceptable ceasefire will be observed, and both countries will be held accountable for respecting the sanctity of these direct negotiations. If the ceasefire is not respected, the US and its partners will impose further sanctions. So the first thing you can say is, A, ideally. Second of all, he says it has to be acceptable, and the sanctions will apply against either party who doesn't observe the ceasefire once it's in place. So that, by no stretch of the imagination, says that somehow he threatened Russia with how the Times put it. It says, for Mr. Trump, this is a reversal. In social media posts in recent months, he episodically threatened tariffs and sanctions against Russia if it refused to join Ukraine in declaring a 30-day unconditional ceasefire. It's a lie, an absolute bold-faced, flat-out lie. I mean, totally made up. Um, but this goes on. The lies go on here because he says he reiterated that stance in a call with Prime Minister Keir Starmer of Britain, Macron, and Merz on Germany when they traveled to Kiev 10 days ago and set a deadline for Mr. Putin to sign the ceasefire. But what's the evidence that he joined them? Well, the evidence, they suppose, is this Reuters story. European leaders say Trump agreed to sanction Russia unless ceasefire agreed. But there's no documentary evidence that he did. That's what the European leaders claimed. They said, oh, yeah, we talked to Trump, but he agreed with us. But, you basically don't understand. And Trump, he was probably talking about something else, probably talking about golf courses. They've got great golf courses in Europe. I love my European allies. Got fantastic. I want to build a golf course in Germany because I love I love the English with the German accent. I can have a golf course. There's no record at all of Trump agreeing to what the Europeans, when they were speaking from in that visit to Kiev. So because then it says Ukraine and European leaders agreed on Saturday to an unconditional 30-day ceasefire from May the 12th with the backing of U.S. President Donald Trump, threatening President Putin with new massive sanctions. The announcement was made by the leaders of Britain, Germany, France, Poland, and Ukraine. So you're saying the United States is committed to this, but strangely enough, the United States isn't in on this announcement.
They're just trying to will it to be true.
Right. And then Mr. Trump implied in his public comments that his call with Mr. Putin had resulted in a breakthrough of sorts. But it quickly became clear to the Ukrainians and Europeans that the Russian leader had made no concessions to Mr. Trump beyond negotiating. Russia is already doing that, albeit half-heartedly, sending a junior team to Istanbul last week for talks with the Ukrainians.
Yeah, everybody, the team that was sent to Istanbul was largely the same team that was sent to Istanbul.
Right. I love the way they presented it's a junior team. That was a serious negotiating. A junior suggests, they sent a couple of interns, some couple of international relations students from Moscow University. It's a junior team.
Yeah, but the
This was a
people
serious
that were
negotiating team.
the people that were sent, many of them were there in 2022,
Right.
and there was, I assume the working assumption is we'll pick up where we left off because
Right.
these are the same characters.
Right. That's it. Yeah, exactly right. Um, So in the meantime, we have um, people who are putting forward, well, what can we think what would be the basis of a negotiating outcome? And so the Quincy Institute um, has put forward a plan for what would be the basis of an agreement. This is their recommendation for an agreement. Now, we've talked about the Quincy Institute, and I think it's fair to say that generally they are in favor of Minsk, a revival of Minsk, a kind of a variant on Minsk 3.
And
Uh,
they haven't really deviated since the start of this part of the conflict. Essentially, those are the confines. That's the Overton window.
exactly. So here, just look at a couple of highlights from this report from Quincy. It says that a successful settlement would require, in exchange for the West and
Well,
Ukraine's.
before we go here, but
Okay.
didn't we do this about another peace plan like 2 weeks ago, three
Uh,
weeks?
did we?
Yeah, we did. We went through it, I think.
Um,
Yeah,
I,
we did. Okay.
I
And
think
so
I
this,
think that was I think that was well I think that was by an individual author, an
yes, but I mean, but
individual author. But
the
this is
same author is part of this.
the
But I
same author's
mean,
body, but this is the
so this is
report.
like the new and improved.
A new, improved, and much longer. I think that was just simply a kind of an op-ed. This is a lengthy report, I think 25 pages or something. So this is um
And so remember, George, we weren't too keen on it.
no.
No.
So, but here you can see the outlines of what they're talking about. In exchange for the West and Ukraine's acknowledgement that Ukraine will not be part of the NATO alliance, Russia accepts eventual EU accession contingent on the constitutional enshrinement of rights for the Russian minority in Ukraine and Ukraine's post-war upholding of the democratic process. So the thing that is immediately striking, first of all, this fetishization of they're not going to be members of NATO. I mean, that doesn't matter. You don't have to be, de jure member of NATO, formally one of the 33 member states. I mean, that's a non-starter. So there's just no point to say, oh, well, that's a big thing. It's not going to be a member of
Yeah,
NATO.
yeah, yeah. But everyone, I'll let you guys, our viewers, dear viewers, in on a secret. Ukraine is already part of NATO.
Exactly, exactly.
Sorry, it
And
has
then
been since 2014. Okay.
yeah, now and then they said, oh, well, contingent on the constitutional enshrinement of the rights of the Russian minority in Ukraine. So now the thing is, has the EU done anything at all to ensure that there's no persecution and discrimination against Russians in EU member states, namely the Baltic states, in Estonia and Latvia, where there's a very substantial Russian speaking population, and their rights are not protected? The EU has done nothing. So the notion is, oh, they'll be in members of the EU, and the EU will be protecting the rights of the Russians. Oh, right. Yeah.
Right.
These people who fulminate daily against the Russians, they're really going to protect the rights of the Russians. And then that's on the second part. Russia accepts a Western armed, trained, and maintained Ukrainian military force capable of deterring and defending against any new invasion. I have difficulties to believe that Russia will accept a Western armed, trained, and maintained Ukrainian military force capable of deterring and defending against any new invasion. That sounds like NATO by any other name.
Well, yeah, I mean, accepts a Western. Okay, well, I mean, if it's going to be Western trained and maintained, then the West is going to be in
It's
Ukraine,
going to
right?
be it has to be there because it's going to be there. So essentially there's going to be a permanent Western presence. How else are they going to be trained and maintained and armed? Somebody has to deliver the arms. Somebody has to, train them to use these arms. Somebody has to maintain these arms.
Well, are the authors here playing a word game with us? So when they're writing the first, accepts a NATO, no, 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 scratch, Western, because, well, most Western countries are in NATO.
Right, right.
So, I mean, dear authors, what is the difference between Western and NATO in this sentence?
See that what they're trying to do here is separate NATO and the EU. So
Oh, yeah, yeah.
EU are the good guys. So that's great. That's a good guys.
Oh, okay. So here, Russia accepts an EU armed trained.
So
Is that
so you think, oh, fantastic. So the EU are the good guys. So let's see now. EU, that's Foreign Minister Kaja Kallas. President of the European Commission is Ursula von der Leyen. And incidentally, there are a number of now agreements between the EU and NATO, specifically, essentially saying NATO is the armed force of the EU. I mean,
right?
it's there.
And
Over
NATO
the years, they've signed
supersedes
a number of these agreements.
and NATO supersedes anything.
Right.
It
That's right.
supersedes and above the
Right.
EU.
Right. So Ursula von der Leyen and Kaja Kallas, what they're going to do is they're going to protect the rights of the Russian speakers of Ukraine. I mean, yeah, I'll buy that. That's going to be they're going to commit themselves to that, and they're going to make sure that as they arm, train, and maintain Ukraine's armed forces, that it won't be a NATO presence. It'll simply be an EU presence.
Okay, everyone, it gets rich. The plot thickens with the next sentence. Go
That's
ahead,
right.
George.
In return, the United States should enter into talks with Russia on a new version of New START.
Okay, what does that have to do with the Ukraine conflict?
Nothing, absolutely nothing.
Nothing. Thank
But
you.
but but it's a good one because you're going to get brownie points. There's nothing more guaranteed to get you brownie points if you say, "Well, I want to start a new arms control agreement." Oh yeah, yeah, that's great. People still, oh yeah, great. I will have an arms control agreement. But even the Biden administration wanted to maintain these arms
Yes.
control agreements. So it doesn't mean anything. Uh, as well as committing to a new version of the intermediate range nuclear force treaty. Well, that isn't going to happen. I mean,
Well, I
that's
mean,
also bogus.
George, when it comes to intermediate range nuclear forces treaty, you need lines. So I mean, because that you're talking about separation, you're talking about ranges. Does that include Ukraine or does it exclude Ukraine
Right,
when it comes to stationing this type of weaponry?
right,
That's important, everyone.
right. Yeah. Uh, but it's go. Oh, look at that. That's the next part. The should. So this is already getting quite complicated. This whole thing. So you're now introducing this, now the new start. You're going to INF. Then you've got Ursula von der Leyen and Kaja Kallas making sure that the Russian speakers are protected in Ukraine. And then you've got this Western armed, trained, maintained forces, but they won't be under NATO auspices. They'll be under EU auspices. So you can see it's getting quite a complicated framework.
Well, off to a bad start, George.
Yes, I think that's very well put.
I mean, and usually your best selling points are on the top. Okay.
And then the United Nations mandates a comprehensive reconstruction fund for Ukraine using frozen Russian assets held by the European Union. including reconstruction in the Russian occupied areas of Ukraine.
Well, Russia can take care of its own. Okay. So, I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
I mean, so Russian money is going to be allocated under the control of someone else to reconstruct part of Russia?
right. But there's another aspect to it, which is Russia would then have to essentially sanction the theft of its property. I find it very difficult. So the Russia would then have to say, okay, then that's perfectly legitimate. You stole this money that we had kept in your banks, and we accept that you have a right to steal our money, and we accept that you have a right to spend our money as you deem fit. It's our money, and yet you get to decide how you're going to spend our money. I don't see Russia agreeing to this, to be honest. I don't see it.
Well, everyone, when this conflict comes to an end, and all of them do eventually, how about this? Give Russia back its money that's been stolen from it, or we'll see you in the courts until the end of
Well,
time,
that's
which
that's yeah, that's a
that's 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 a very real possibility.
right.
Or let's be practical and pragmatic. A great deal of infrastructure in Ukraine has been destroyed. Let's look at the energy grid, the electricity grid. Well, a lot of that is Russian/Soviet technology. Well, Russia can be a shareholder in developing that. I think that would be a win-win for everyone. Ukraine gets its energy back, and and on the same basis of which it was developed, and Russia would have an interest in seeing that infrastructure not being destroyed in the future. I mean, there are more. I mean, I've come across this argument from this person and from many other people like him, and this is a non-starter. Okay,
Right.
you cannot sell that to the Russian public. You
I don't think
cannot.
so. I don't think so. And then Ukraine and Russia accept a ceasefire along the current territorial battle lines, establishing a de facto border in the four provinces of eastern Ukraine. That will not be further changed by force or subversion.
But
I
what
mean,
is subversion
all
here?
right.
Like
That,
someone holds an election and the West doesn't recognize it. That's subversion. They do it
right.
all the time.
That's right. Once a broader political settlement has been established, Ukraine, Russia, Europe, and the US accept a UN peacekeeping and monitoring force drawn from neutral global South countries to adjudicate a ceasefire line. And
Yeah, whoa,
then
whoa, 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 whoa,
right.
let's go back.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if the war is ended, why do you need a ceasefire line?
Well, I think that what you mean is that the de
No, no,
facto
no, you see my point,
right.
okay?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I thought this is a comprehensive end to the conflict.
Right.
If you have to have peacekeeping forces, then it's not comprehensive.
Right.
It's not a peace.
Right.
It's a truce.
Right. Right. Well, that's right. That's what it would be, a truce. Which means again, we go back to the question of Minsk. I mean, is this simply Minsk? You just it
Okay, all
becomes
right, all right. I don't want to strain you here. Okay, read the last bullet point one more time, please.
once a broader political settlement has been established, Ukraine, Russia, Europe, and the US accept the UN peacekeeping and monitoring force drawn from neutral global South countries. To
Okay, now let's go back a slide.
all right, wait, you read that then.
Okay. Uh, which one here? Go back one more, please.
Back slide.
Yeah, go
Okay.
back one slide back more. Okay. Okay. Well, so if we have a global South peacekeeping, well, then why does Russia accept a Western armed, trained, and
All right,
maintained?
no,
And
that's
what I mean, are they mutually consistent? I think they're not.
yeah, yeah, that's right.
I mean, if you have a well-trained and maintained by the West Ukrainian military, then why do we need a peacekeeping force?
Well, that's right, and this whole thing of oh well, we can have a Western armed, trained, and maintained Ukrainian military. Well, other countries have maintained the neutral status. but nonetheless, they didn't have a Western trained, armed, maintained military. I mean, that's when Austria did not do it. Austria um, achieved or acquired neutrality status in 1957. But that didn't say, oh, well, but we can arm and train it and essentially to be a kind of an adjunct to NATO. That wasn't part of the deal. Same with Finland. There wasn't say, okay, well, fine, Finland will maintain a kind of it'll be non-aligned, but we'll have a Western trained, armed, maintained force. That
Well,
wasn't part of the deal.
well, it was very subterranean. I mean, the Finns and the Swedes had always had ties with NATO, but it was kept very much under wraps.
Well,
It was
that's
not
right. I mean,
wasn't.
go.
No,
No,
what I'm
no,
saying
that's right.
is,
It was kept under wraps, and it was done in a way to ensure that in no way, shape, or form was this a somehow a Western trained force. He's making it clear this is he intends to make this a Western trained force. Western trained force means it's going to be increasingly integrated within the whole Western, trained NATO infrastructure. So therefore, that's where they're going to try and maintain this. If you go Western armed, trained, and maintained, so they're going to be trained in Western ways of warfare, and they're going to be obviously integrated in some ways with the Western armed forces that are in neighboring countries. I mean, you're going to say, oh, then they're going to make sure
well, why does it have to
there'll be
be
no integration between Ukrainian armed forces and
exactly?
Polish armed forces.
Why does it have to be Western?
Right.
Because it's going to be integrated.
It will integrate, exactly. And then it goes on. The geopolitical compromise, the West and Kiev agree that Ukraine will not be part of NATO or host Western forces. I don't get this. Host, but how you're going to be hosting Western forces? You can't have a Western trained, armed, and maintained if you're not hosting Western forces. In turn, Moscow agrees not to try to block Ukrainian accession to the European Union. Um,
Again, this is like a fair trade-off because one, it deals with security, the other one doesn't.
right,
And that is not equivalent.
right,
This is apples and oranges in one sentence.
right. But again, it's still a matter of that the European Union and NATO are increasingly um, inseparable. I mean, it's like they used to be. Yeah, used to be have the European Union, and you had NATO, but that's changed. That's simply got more and more. The European Union and NATO are thoroughly integrated. They signed agreements. There was several agreements signed between the European and NATO, which make it clear that essentially the NATO and the European Union are absolutely one and the same. I mean, that was always the issue, even with that EU association agreement with Yanukovych. It was there. It was there in black and white that you are going to be integrated within the Western security, defense and security infrastructure. So it was already there. It was in that lengthy agreement that was what was required of Ukraine. It was there with the agreement that Yanukovych refused to sign.
Such an agreement. Yeah.
In what?
Go ahead. You're starting with such an
Oh,
agreement.
like I said, yes, such a compromise would address Russia's most significant security concern that Ukraine might become a base that Western militaries could use against it.
But you said three slides ago that it would be. I don't see this is not addressing Russia's security concerns at all.
I don't see that at all. But this would allow Kiev a viable path towards its vital goal of becoming a part of the West politically and economically. What is I don't why is that a vital goal?
Again, what does this have to do with Russia's security?
Yeah, but that's it. But I don't. Um, but uh, you're saying become part of the West politically and economically, but that hadn't been the case from 1991 on. From
It only
1991 on,
changed. It
yeah,
only changed with the coup.
that's right. Up until then, Ukraine had maintained its status as essentially a kind of a go between East and West. Did not say, "Oh, we're going to be integrated. We must absolutely integrate to be a part of the West." And Yanukovych, I mean, he made that clear. He ran on that platform in 2010 that there was going to be no integration with the West. A reciprocal security assurance, no agreement will be possible absent Russia's acceptance that Ukraine must have a significant military capable of deterring and defending against any new invasion, something that will be viable only with ongoing Western arms training and maintenance aid, though certain categories of weapons, including long-range missiles, could be excluded. So they repeat this again. And once you repeat this, I don't see how we're going to make any progress along these lines. And that was ultimately what did in the Istanbul Agreement in 2022. I mean, if you're going to go there and again, oh, we're going to keep building up our armed forces, we're going to have the Western countries are going to help build up our armed forces. That is not going to be acceptable to the Russians because that is NATO by any other name. Um,
I'm sorry, this is not serious. All right.
all right. But such acceptance is unlikely outside the context of a broader European arms control framework that addresses Moscow's concerns about threats posed by NATO conventional and nuclear capabilities against Russia. Okay, so how are we going to get that done? And then we have EU, the political optics of accepting Russia's demands to protect the linguistic and cultural rights of Ukraine's Russian minority, defang what he regards as nationalist extremists, and hold new elections would be highly problematic for Kiev, though Moscow could offer reciprocal protections for Ukrainian citizens of Russia. Ukraine, however,
I'm not sure I understand. What does that mean?
yeah,
Okay.
I don't know.
Okay, because it would be highly problematic for Kiev. So Russia can't demand it.
It does seem like a highly problematic. Also, I have to say this again: the EU is not going to do anything to protect the linguistic, cultural rights of Russians. This is an absolutely meaningless statement to make. It sounds good, like when we're talking about international humanitarian laws. Yes, we must make sure the linguistic and cultural rights of the Russians are. You had 8 years during Minsk to grant special status to the Donbass. You never did it. The EU did nothing at all to push for it. The EU will not. You think Kaya Kallas, she's going to go out on a limb and she's going to, yeah, we need to maintain the linguistic and cultural rights of Russia's minority.
Though Moscow could offer reciprocal protections for Ukrainian citizens of Russia. So I'm not sure. So they're talking about as part of this deal that Russia has to have some kind of special legal cutout for Ukrainian citizens of Russia. I'm mystified by that. Ukrainians in Russia are not experiencing any discrimination
Right,
because they're citizens.
right.
Maybe I'm totally
Well,
misreading that. Though Russia could offer reciprocal
right.
protections for Ukrainian citizens of Russia.
Well,
What the
presumably,
hell does that mean?
presumably that they'll provide Ukrainian schools, Ukrainian language schools. I assume that's what they mean, Ukrainian language schools inside
Well,
Russia.
yeah, I guess, but Ukrainians really have, I mean, no one tells people what to speak at home, okay? You can have private language schools. No one's going to stop you doing that. Um, if you go to the post office, you're going to have to use Russian, but I mean, That's not a problem if you're speaking Ukrainian. I mean, there's no linguistic protections that are necessary.
Right.
This is
Um,
absurd. It's absurd.
right. Yeah. And then we have the sanctions reliefs to varying degrees. Both Ukraine and Russia need economic relief. Ukraine from the extreme financial and demographic duress of war. Russia from Western sanctions that, while not crippling to its economy, have nonetheless produced a discomforting dependence on trade with China and the global South. And and then because Ukraine lacks sufficient air defenses to prevent Russian missile and bomb strikes against nascent reconstruction project, Kiev is unlikely to attract large-scale reconstruction aid without Moscow's agreement to a settlement. And much of the West will object to any sanctions relief for Russia absent a peace accord. Um, this I think this whole thing I think I find quite confusing. Um, I
Well, I
don't
mean,
what I mean
okay. I mean,
I don't
all
get the
right.
whole the
I
oh,
don't.
go on anyway.
My problem here is the conflating, because essentially this whole paper is talking about a ceasefire, a truce, and but absent a peace accord. I mean, there's a jump here, and I don't
Yeah,
understand
I
about
don't
that.
fully get it. I mean, I think yeah, that's right. That's saying somehow um yeah, I don't know this. It's just I don't know. The whole thing just seems like it's going around in a circle because Ukraine lacks sufficient air defenses to prevent Russian missile and bomb strikes against the nascent reconstruction projects. Kiev is very unlikely to attract large-scale reconstruction aid without Moscow's agreement or settlement. But I thought we're already talking about a settlement. I thought that's the whole point, that this is after the settlement, and
Yeah,
much
I
of the
mean,
West will object to any sanctions relief.
nobody in their right mind right now is thinking about large-scale reconstruction under the current circumstances.
Right, that's right. So that's why this argument just so doesn't make um very much sense.
It's convoluted. Yeah.
Yeah. And then a compromise settlement on the fraught issue of delineating the border of Russia and Ukraine must be based on the recognition that neither side will cede territory it occupies at the time of settlement, nor win new land at the negotiating table. But both sides should be able to agree that the de facto border will not be changed by force or subversion. And then the issue.
Well, again, I'm not really sure what moving pieces are going on here. Um, there will be a border when this conflict comes to an end, when there is a peace treaty or something resembling it. So, what happens? Let's say they're Kurdistan. Well, what if the people there on both sides of the line want to have an election and they decide to go to Russia? Is that subversion?
Well,
I mean, in the very first few points, they're talking about, the sanctity of Ukrainian democracy, which doesn't exist. Okay, I mean, again, this is Minsk all over again.
right,
What is Minsk? Let's do something in lieu of ending it. That's what
right,
Minsk is, or.
right, right. Um, and then yeah, stable separation of forces and peace. That's right. And then we have the U.S.-Russian agreement on the broad outlines of a political settlement could be followed by intense U.S. engagement with Ukraine to build support for a settlement and highlight the negative consequences that would almost inevitably flow from failure to settle the war.
Are the authors assuming that Zelensky's going to be in charge? I mean,
Well, I mean, I think that there
we have
is
no inkling that that's even
no.
remotely
I
possible.
think Zelensky presumably will be in charge up until the conclusion of the war, and presumably following that there would be elections. I mean, at least according to this time frame. So presumably the time frame is that there has to be um, this U.S. and Russia agreement will take place now, and there'll be pressure from the U.S. on Zelensky, um, uh, uh, you know, that for intense
Yeah, but
U.S.
I mean,
engagement.
George, so what happened to nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine? This is an imposed peace,
This is
right?
that's right. This is imposed. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I just want to make that
Yeah,
sure.
that this is imposed. Yeah, that was my understanding that this is going to be imposed, and that Ukraine it'll be a kind of a take it or leave it approach. Um, but the problem that they have is that if they can do if you do the take it or leave it, I mean, yes, you can do a take it or leave it to Ukraine. I don't know how you do a take it or leave it to Russia, because you have a limited leverage over Russia. I mean, yeah, you have a lot of leverage over Ukraine, so you can pressure Ukraine, but I don't know how you can pressure Russia to accept all of these demands that obviously Russia would have great difficulties in accepting. Um, so they're saying the negative consequences that would almost inevitably flow from a failure to settle the war, bringing Ukraine around to accepting key elements of a political settlement, will require the United States to employ honey and vinegar. An intense campaign of public diplomacy and direct engagement with Ukrainian political and business leaders will be necessary to persuade Ukrainians that prolonging the war would result in a more onerous settlement, and that compromise now would secure Ukraine's independence and anchoring it in the West. And well,
But, but that's been Russia's policy since Istanbul. I mean, settle now or settle later. I mean, now we have the Quincy Institute saying exactly the same thing. Settle now or settle later for less.
well, that's right. But then, so you can then argue, well, what does the Quincy Institute think? Should the Americans say to Ukraine, basically that's the deal. You have to accept it, or we're cutting you off. I mean, that's ultimately. I mean, there's no other way around it. Ultimately, or we cut you off. I mean, if
Well,
you're saying that you have to apply pressure against Ukraine, then that's the only way you apply it. You say, well, you take this deal, or we cut you off.
okay, this is kind of like, Trump is the pig and the Quincy Institute is the lipstick on the pig. Take
Um,
it or leave it, or we're going to walk.
right. Right. Well,
Well,
but
what I'm saying is they're trying to, dress it up, okay? But the same, the same rigid logic is coming into play, all right? Is that Trump wants to end this thing. He doesn't know, he no longer wants to be preoccupied with it. He's brought the two parties together. You have to make a deal or we're going to walk away. Is this any different? That's the vinegar.
that's it. I mean, as far as I can see, that's all that they're really suggesting. I mean, it's like a lot of words
Yeah.
to get to that. So just say, hey, I mean that's what they say. Honey, vinegar, and whatever. But essentially, an intense campaign of public diplomacy and direct engagement with Ukrainian political business leaders will be necessary to persuade Ukrainians that prolonging the war would result in a more onerous settlement, and that compromise now would secure Ukraine's independence and anchor it in the West. Okay, so that's basically what they're saying. He said that the Trump should just simply tell them, either you accept these terms or we walk.
Well, and also, from what we've read already here, the very last part here, even though NATO membership is unattainable, no, this is a blueprint for to
Right.
be in NATO, but not in name. That's it. This is a
Right.
blueprint.
That's right. I mean, I think that what they're saying is that okay, you tell them this, and then you turn around and tell the Russians what? Oh, we just accept this great deal, or we're offering you this great deal. But then you have to ask, well, why would Russia? What's in it for Russia?
Okay, George, what does Russia get out of all of these words?
I don't see it.
I don't see.
I don't really see it at all. I don't see the
Okay,
incentive.
George. So, as you've expounded twice already. So the Russians should expect that the European Union will respect the Russian minority.
Right.
Well, Russia can say, well, we can protect the Russian minority.
Well, no, but the Russian minority that
Which
the Russian
which
minority,
one is
no,
which one
but
has more
right,
veracity?
right, but the Russian minority, they mean the Russian minority in Ukraine proper, not the Russian minority within the oblasts. I mean, the Russians who are living on the to the west of the Dnieper. That's what they're referring to. So that they're going to protect those. The problem, first of all, the Europeans are not going to do anything to protect them. That's already off the table. They've done nothing to protect them up until now. The 300 billion euros, he's pretty much saying you're not going to get any of that back. So down the road, there is supposedly, or they're going to lift sanctions. Well, they're not going to lift sanctions. I mean, that's there's no evidence at all that the Europeans are going to agree to lifting sanctions. So I don't see what exactly this plan offers the Europeans. Offers the Russians.
Sorry, no words.
Yeah, that's right. Ultimately, announced U.S. threats to cut off military and intelligence aid should Ukraine fail to compromise may be necessary. Now you tell us. So take us some time for you to tell us this.
Well, as critical as they are of the Trump administration, that's what already happened.
Right.
Okay.
This may seem a harsh approach, but it may well be that it is only by being able to claim that President Zelensky has been forced to compromise by overwhelming U.S. pressure that he will be able to get hardline elements in Ukraine and in his own administration to agree to a settlement, even if the alternative is far worse, defeat. But all the time, everything's really about Ukraine. You still haven't addressed the problem here, which is, well, first of all, what's in it for Russia, but how also what are you going to do to deal with the problem of a security threat to Russia? You've done nothing. There's nothing here. All of it is, well, what can we do to keep Ukraine happy and keep NATO happy and whatever. So other than that, I don't get how this is in any way, other than just Minsk III, and the same thing
Well,
as before.
this is NATO expansion without calling it NATO. That's all.
That's it. It's NATO expansion without calling it NATO. Okay, so we'll do that. We'll integrate it within the whole Western military infrastructure, but we will say in public that Ukraine, at least for the time being, it's not, we know this for the time being, we'll say that Ukraine is not a member of NATO.
Until they say Ukraine is a member of NATO.
That's right. And then I think there's another one here. And then here they talk about this European support will be critical to persuading Ukraine to accept a settlement. The Europeans are not going to tell Ukraine to support a settlement. We know this. Everything we know of the Europeans. And then he basically saying leading figures in Brussels and elsewhere have also nailed themselves so firmly to the rejection of a compromise that it will be extremely difficult for them to change course. You don't say. And then I think then U.S.-Russia relations. So this is what they're saying, that everything is really about this U.S.-Russia relations. This apparently matters a lot to the Russians. And it is true that it matters a lot to the Russians, but the problem is that, well, what happens next? I mean, it's like, well, who comes after Trump? Is there any guarantee at all that the next man in is going to maintain that? I mean, it says here, Lindsey Graham has already, 80 senators ready to sign on to this not insane sanctions policy that they're going to hit all countries who purchase Russian oil, gas, and uranium with 500% tariffs. Those are the figures. Those are the creatures in Washington who are there, with foaming at the mouth to continue to wage some kind of a proxy war against Russia. So even if there's an U.S.-Russia relations, what's the guarantee that this will be any more successful than the U.S.-Russia relations after Gorbachev, the U.S.-Russia relations after Yeltsin, U.S.-Russia relations under Putin? None of them was long-lasting. So they were. This is something the administration of Mikhail Gorbachev, Boris Yeltsin, and Vladimir Putin all sought in vain since the end of the Cold War. Between 2008 and 2011, it was a core aim of Dmitry Medvedev,
So
and it didn't
I love how
succeed.
they argue against
They
themselves.
argue against themselves, and I think that's the that's so anyway. That's just the highlights of this document. People are free to read it. It's a little lengthy, but I don't really. There's a lot of should. This should be done. That
There's
should be done. We should do this. Should do that. I don't see how this gets very far.
I'm sorry, this is all just recycled stuff. There's nothing original in it. I was disappointed because responsible statecraft, not I'm talking about its global
Quincy, yeah, the
reach.
Quincy Institute, yeah.
I'm sorry, Quincy. Well, responsible statecraft, the
Is it? Yeah,
publication.
it's that's the bulletin board.
That's their
Yeah, yeah.
publication. I mean, and some of their articles, even on Russia and Ukraine, are quite good. Ian Proud is very, very good on many things. But this is just a kind of a global rehash of 3.5 years of
Right,
verbiage.
right,
Okay. And it is so America-centric, Eurocentric, Ukraine-centric. They can't get away from that. They
right,
cannot get away from it. And even though these authors and many people responsible for statecraft know the lineage, the origins of it, they know it very, very well.
right,
But they won't address that, at least not give it the weight that it deserves.
right,
So Russia has to suck it up. But that's it.
right. Yeah, that's right, and that's really the problem here is that when you said that they argue against themselves, so you're basically saying all these things that you are recommending, this should happen, that should happen, they've all been tried before, and they've all been found wanting, and really none of these things is likely to happen. I mean, so the protection of the Russian speakers in Ukraine. Well, Ukraine didn't do anything to protect them before. And the EU has done nothing to protect Russian speakers inside the EU. I mean, so to make this, part of it, an important ingredient in the settlement is just a lack of any realism. Oh, well, Ukraine won't be a member of NATO. Well, that's we've already dealt with that. It won't, it won't formally be a member of NATO. That isn't really the issue. The issue is, will it be de facto a member of NATO? And they more or less say, yeah. Because why? Because we can't really stop the West moving in to Ukraine and arming and training and maintaining. Okay, so why then? What is the advantage? What advantage does Russia get from accepting the settlement? What does Russia get out of accepting this?
You clean the bank account out, and you want us to Russia to accept that.
That's right. We'll take your 300 billion euros and we'll spend it the way we want to spend it. So,
Well, okay. Well, thank you very much. We'll take it under consideration. We'll get back to you in 6 months and see if you'll stand by it because Ukraine will have become smaller. Okay. And everything, again, responsible statecraft, in lieu of serious peace talks that Trump wants, are you going to keep allocating more money to Ukraine? I don't see the Trump administration doing that.
I don't
I
think so.
just don't.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
So you guys are on the clock because this is Minsk 3. Um, and we're in a holding pattern because up and until and it really when you think about it in retrospect, think about it, George. Immediately after the special military operation started, what did both sides, the Ukrainians and the Russians, agree to? Let's talk. Let's talk. Okay?
yeah.
And that's where it's going to be. At the end of the day, we've had our ups and downs on this. it's going to be, excuse me, this is decided on the battlefield. This is not enough.
Well, yeah,
These ideas are not enough.
yeah. This isn't really. Yeah, yeah. It's a non-starter. Um, because you're not addressing the real issues here, and simply going back to Minsk III, and really that's been that's been a theme at Responsible Statecraft almost from the beginning, when it was clear that's a non-starter, because we had 8 years of Minsk II. After all this war, after all the killings and everything, just to go back to Minsk III, that really would be seen to be a huge, huge waste of lives and resources. So I don't see it going there.
And George, what we've said from very, very beginning, with this proposal on the table for the public to peruse, it's still with Western trained, et cetera, military. It's just this is a truce until the
Truce,
conflict starts again.
exactly,
That's
exactly.
all it is.
It's a truce, exactly. They rebuild Ukraine's armed forces, spend another 10 years or whatever rebuilding it, and then can start again. Absolutely start again. Plus, not just rebuild the armed forces, rebuild it with that 300 billion euros, and then we know, they're going to go to this where you have the ceasefire allowance. That's where you're going to start making trouble, just like under Minsk too. It's fairly obvious that's the plan. Have a breather for 8 to 10 years and then start again. That's why I think it's Minsk III is the absolutely correct designation, and that for all the words and everything, and the dangled, oh, but improve relations with the United States. Oh, well,
Oh,
improve relations. That's great, because it's really worked out so well for us in the past. All those great relations that we had with the United States, whether it was, with the elder Bush and Bill Clinton and Obama and everything, they always absolutely they stuck to their promises, and they never took advantages of us.
well, shelve that one,
Yeah.
this proposal, because it's a dead on arrival. And um, I don't know. I mean, do people write these things to tell their boss they wrote a peace proposal?
Yes, they tell. That's what it was. Hey, they every year they have to go to their donors and show that, hey, we're doing some serious work here.
White papers, media appearances. I know this is all true.
That's
You got to demonstrate
that you
because you need
absolutely
that.
have to do. Exactly. Are you making an impact? Yeah, you bet we're making an impact. Look at this proposal. Wow, we drafted this proposal, a peace plan, no less. Well, okay. Here's the check for the next 6 months. So that absolutely, that's how you have to justify your existence, and that and that's the reason for this. Um,
Yep. And you know what, George? For Ukraine, and all these peace plans, Ukraine ends up in the gutter, and its political leadership most likely will as well if they don't escape. Okay, none of this, you know, the, you and I follow this. I mean, going all the way back to the coup. Okay, and watch. I can remember being at a conference, and I said, "War is inevitable. It will. I don't know when, but it's inevitable."
right.
And undoing all of this is horrifically hard. And George is right. You know, Trump announced the end of sanctions on Syria. Well, we'll see. We'll see. Undoing sanctions is a lot of work, okay?
Right.
A whole lot of work, okay? Once you do it, it's hard to undo it, okay? The United States has a long history. Look, even after the JCPOA, did they rescind sanctions on Iran? No,
Yeah.
no. Even when documents were signed and agreed to, the sanctions never came down.
Yeah.
No, the goal has always been the same.
Yeah. Right.
the strategic defeat of Russia. This is just a pause.
Yeah.
This is just a pause. The goal, it remains. It's been there since Napoleon, okay? And it's been unrelenting, unrelenting,
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah.
And what's the historical oddity of all of this is that Ukraine wants to volunteer, even continue volunteering for duty, okay? Its leadership must be lavishly paid to do this, okay? Because you don't see, look at the economic indicators, look at GDP, look at disposable income. This war ain't good for the average Ukrainian.
Yeah.
That's an understatement.
Yeah. That's exactly right. A truly catastrophic leadership, and yeah, it's quite extraordinary. And but they're doing what the European powers and up until the new team that's taken over in Washington, what the Americans want them to do, and they were happy volunteered to be cannon fodder. They were the cannon fodder. They were getting killed. They were getting destroyed. Cannon fodder for someone else, to be for a proxy war. You you have to be absolutely crazy to do that for someone else. They're okay. They have a nice life. They're safe and sound. We, however, we're getting destroyed. That's not a good look.
And the millions and millions of Ukrainians that have left, it's very doubtful the majority will return.
Yeah.
George, just think of this. Let's say, out of the blue, miraculously, act of God, whatever, there is a truce, and
Mm-hmm.
they open Ukraine opens its borders. How many more
Right.
people will they bleed?
Right.
I
Right.
mean, did this white paper deal with the demographic catastrophe of Ukraine? No. It didn't even talk about its economics at all.
Yeah.
It didn't talk about the real Ukraine.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
good try, guys. Good try. At least you know what? You got us to pay attention to it for an
Exactly.
hour.
Exactly. Yeah. Your funders. We done some work for you. That should put you in good stead with your funders. So, oh look, the gaggle paid attention to us.
And speaking of the gaggle, this is the gaggle with Peter and George. We're on local, so please go to the gaggle.locals.com. We're finishing up our Friday blowout as we tend to do. We will reconvene on Sunday to do another one, and then live stream with God's help. We'll do a live stream on Monday at 10 Eastern, and then George goes out swinging on
So,
his own
let,
solo on Tuesday.
exactly. And now you have to then think about the real question, because these savage hounds, they heard about these funders and, people
Oh,
bankrolling.
hang on here. I just our sparring partner, Mark Sloboda, just sent me a message. I think you got it too here.
Uh-huh.
There's not a single point here that I can see Russia agreeing to now. I could spend hours dissecting and rebutting it. Well, Mark, we just did.
We just did it. We did the job.
Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
All right. No, I think it's right. But the dogs say, yeah, funding, that's what they're so funding. That has to be, there's the tip jar, the funding goes into that. And they're ready to put forward a proposal, a lengthy proposal of how much funding is required for the tip jar. So we're very grateful for all of your help, friendship, and support. The more you're able to donate, the more of these videos we can make, the more we can improve on the technology, and above all, we'll get those dogs off this whole proposal racket. It's a racket. I mean, it's a big waste of time. I know from experience. So remember, if you like the gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye bye.